Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Q&A. We have with us today Isabel Sandoval, tuning in from North Carolina. Hi, Isabel.
Hi, Diego. Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching Lingua Franca as part of Queer Wave. I'm very excited and happy for Diego and his team that they were able to pull this festival off. It's
It's a
quite an
pleasure.
achievement. So congratulations.
Thank you so much, Isabel. It's a real pleasure having you here and for our very first edition as well. And I just wanted to start off by saying, this feels like a very personal project. Uh, I know you've stated it's not autobiographical, but it is very personal to you. It's set in New York, where you're based as a filmmaker. To start off, you've written, directed, edited, and star in this film, your third feature. Tell us about how that, all came to life. How did you put everything together for it?
Um, it's my third feature, but it is my first post-transition after my gender transition. And it is also my first to be set in and produced in the US. So in a way, I wanted to reintroduce, I guess, the art house audience to who I am as an auteur and as an artist.
Mm-hmm.
And like in my first feature, Senorita, where I also played a trans woman, that was actually before my transition.
Amazing.
That premiered in Locarno. I also acted, wrote, and directed. But with Lingua Franca, I feel like I've learned as a filmmaker, and my sensibility and aesthetic has also evolved.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted Lingua Franca to be a showcase of that evolution and my development as an artist and as a filmmaker. I've also noticed that in terms of narrative, I tend to gravitate to stories of, women with a secret. That's true in my first and second feature, and it's also true about Lingua Franca. It just so happens that her secret is that, one, she's undocumented, and second, that she's transgender. So I think my my sensibility is very noirish, like film noir. And so while I was writing Lingua Franca, that was also the time when I had just, finished my transition, and that was when Trump got elected as president in the US. And especially in the first few months after his election, I was feeling very anxious and vulnerable and troubled, just like a lot of minorities in the US. And so I channeled that frame of mind and that emotional state into kind of the mood and tone behind Lingua Franca. And so that's how I came up with the premise of the film. And yeah, it went from there. We shot it in 2018, in the fall of 2018, and exactly a year later, it premiered at the Venice Film Festival.
How exciting it was to see the film premiering there. Like, how was that for you? Like, I mean, I know your previous two films have been in festivals like Busan and Locarno and have been awarded. And I mean, it must be so rewarding to see that, you're continuously able to share your films at festivals like these.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it was, Locarno and Busan are, of course, amazing festivals, but, Venice is a totally different level. And thanks to Diego, too, for recommending the film to Giornate after watching it. It feels very vindicating because while I was making the film, there are also skeptics, understandably. And, not just because of me being trans and, the issues about sexism and misogyny, but also the fact that I'm wearing multiple hats in the film, which is very ambitious.
Mhm.
admittedly. And also, when we were pitching the film to potential investors, a few of them wanted to change significant, parts of the storyline to make it, for example, more physically violent towards Olivia,
Olivia.
yeah, in the film. And I said no,
Mhm.
and we also had an actual production company that invested in the film. And when we showed them the rough cut, or essentially what became the ending in the film, now they really did not like it,
But
because
you
it's,
stood by it.
yes, I stood by it. I'm also thankful that my core group of producers really, supported me. And when we got the news that it was accepted to Venice, I was like, okay. And more and more of those people were coming back and saying like, oh, it's actually great, like, sure. But it's such a nice feeling, to have, my artistry and how I've grown so far as a filmmaker, validated, by a
Absolutely.
festival like Venice. And it also made me definitely trust my voice more and be more confident in what I have to say as a filmmaker.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. I'm so happy for you. I just wanted to ask, like, as a trans woman of color, how complicated was it getting the funding to make this film, pitching your story? Do you
Yeah.
think anything has changed, like before and after the transition? If you don't mind me asking, how have people responded?
Um, I've been thinking about this question for the last few months, and I think it's because I don't completely, you know, come from a mindset that I'm a minority,
Hmm.
even though, in the outside reality, that's how people perceive me as. So, in that, I don't let that label kind of dampen my own confidence in my ability. And
Excellent.
yeah, and it's a great thing that in the US, for instance, there are grants and institutions that do support the voices of minority filmmakers. So in that sense, I was very fortunate, in that a lot of these institutions supported lingua franca one way or in another,
Hmm.
through, awarding us development grants or completion grants for the film. And one of my producers is also very connected, on Broadway.
Hmm.
He's a Tony Award winning theater producer, and he was able to get equity investors for the film. And, our key group were our group of Filipino immigrants in the US. And I feel like if I don't let the thinking that we're a disadvantaged and marginalized group in the entertainment industry, like, dampen my enthusiasm,
Yep.
I think, minorities, there are a lot of talented minority artists and filmmakers that can group together and make a project like Lingua Franca happen, which is the case in, for this film.
Beautiful. And there's this idea that, of course, minorities all together like make up a majority, don't they? So
Yeah.
I mean, it's not. Um, I don't think it's in anyone's best interest to think in terms of minorities. And
Yeah.
anyway, um, I think another point I wanted to touch on was your background was initially not in filmmaking, but
Mhm.
actually in business. How do you think that's, helped you as a filmmaker? Or, how did you, when did you decide that film was the right path for you?
Um, I've always been passionate about film and cinema as a kid, growing up, because, you know, you don't really choose your passions, but your passions choose you. But it's up to you whether you want to pursue it as a career,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And also, for the longest time, you know, in the Philippines, you're not taught that, you know, filmmaking can really be a sustainable career or a grown-up career. You know, so I took up business and I actually started working in brand management
Mm-hmm.
for, you know, a personal care company like Unilever. So I did that for a year or two, and then I pursued my graduate degree in business at NYU in New York City. Um, but I specialized in marketing and media and entertainment. So my foot was, you know, I still had one foot in the door,
Yeah.
so to speak. And yeah, that's after working in media for a few years for a digital magazine, I decided to make my first feature, Senorita. And, you know, for a few years, you kind of have to have like a more stable career.
Mm-hmm.
Like I did marketing and I also edited videos and then pursued my filmmaking on the side. But I was very clear and I had, you know, very clear goals in my mind that, you know, in like 5 to 10 years, I'd want to transition um, more fully into a filmmaking or directing career. And part of that is sticking to my own vision with Lingua Franca. And now, you know, it's open in France and it's done quite well. Theatrically there, I Lingua Franca has been acquired by Ava DuVernay's company,
I was gonna touch on
RFA.
that actually. I'm
Yeah,
so glad you brought it up.
thank you for Netflix North America. And this is just between us for now. But a cable channel is buying a TV series that I'm developing.
Wow.
And
Wow.
they're getting me on board as a writer, director, and a showrunner.
That
So
is
fingers
huge.
crossed. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and it was my very first, you know, pitched for a TV show, and they were the first cable channel that we pitched to. And they're also, you know, I mean, they're a pretty renowned, you know, channel. They've just gotten a bunch of Emmy nominations in the latest, you know, announcement. Um, so yeah, I think I'm very, very lucky because I feel it's both a combination of talent, opportunity, and luck.
Mhm.
In that, you know, as long as you're ready for that opportunity, the universe, you know, will conspire to make it happen for you. And yeah, I feel like I really waited and, you know, worked hard to make it happen. And
I'm
so I'm
sure.
grateful that things are starting to align for me and the universe is saying that you're right to pursue this and now I'm going to give you the opportunities that you've been working towards. So
That's really wonderful to hear. And I mean, you know, this TV series you're mentioning, was that always sort of part of your vision? Or because I know you're also preparing a fourth feature,
yes,
which Locarno Open Doors is actually helping with.
yes.
How how does that all fit together in your timetable, you know?
um yeah, the TV series started, I started putting that together last summer,
Hmm.
before Lingua Franca premiered. And at that time, we were part of the Tribeca Film Institute,
Hmm.
which is kind of like a speed dating, you know, industry network set up for projects
Yeah.
and potential partners. And at that time, I really started prepping the TV series, which what I like about working in that one is that I came up with a story. It's also my passion project in a way, and I
Hmm.
have a creative, you know, autonomy and creative control about the story. And in terms of managing the schedule, I think I'm gonna write the pilot for a TV series in the next 3 to 4 months,
Hmm.
probably. And then if the cable network likes it, we're gonna shoot the pilot probably early next year. Um,
Amazing.
Yeah, and if they
Fingers-
like it, then they put in an order for a series. Then we shoot the series, which is probably going to take 6 months. Um,
That's
but for
intense.
now, I'm done. Yeah, I'm done writing the script for Tropical Gothic, which is my next feature. And we are now in the process of attaching our production company for it. And one of the consultants in Locarno was actually saying that he sees the potential of the project to really break out. And so to aim for big stars like, I don't know, Gael Garcia Bernal, or like, okay.
Okay, jaw
So
dropping right now. Wow. I'm
yeah, I
so
mean,
excited for this.
and this is you know, he's an experienced British French producer who's worked with the likes of Olivier Assayas, um, and
Yeah.
he was also producer on Lady Macbeth, um, with Florence Pugh.
Yeah.
So for that to come from someone like him also makes me feel, you know, start to realize, you know, the possibilities for a project like Tropical Gothic. I mean, at first my ambitions were more modest, but now I feel like, you know what? If he feels that this could break out, I really should, you know, aim for the stars.
I think
With
you definitely should. It looks like you're already up there. I don't know. Like, best of luck. Fingers
fingers
crossed for
crossed.
you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I just wanted to like ask, I don't know if this is sneaky, but like, will there be any like trans narratives in your upcoming works? And, you know, I'd like to, yeah, no, let's start from there.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And I think, for example, if I ever act again,
Are you
like the
being
character,
advised not to do it? Like, because you're doing too many things. Are you being advised not to?
um, no, but there are projects that I feel like I don't want to act in. There are
Yeah.
also projects that I'm developing that I think, you know, it would be great for me to be in the film. Yeah, I definitely am working on some trans narratives. It might not be, you know, like it's interesting in lingua franca because even though she's trans, and it becomes kind of a point in the film, especially in relation to the other characters,
Yeah.
with Alex. It's also not everything that the film is about.
Hmm. Definitely.
Yeah,
I,
it's just part of the premise, and there's actually a story. Um, and so, if I am doing a trans narrative in the future, I want it to be even more embedded in the narrative, where it exists to the point that it's, you know, it's just there, and we don't have to make a fuss or an issue about it. Like, you know, I'm in very, very early stages of thinking of doing kind of like a very loose remake of Dangerous Liaisons,
wow.
but with vampires, and I'm playing the Glenn Close role. And I think also the fact that you know, that people already know me as trans, whether I acknowledge that the character is trans or not, I think that will still inform, you know, people's perception of that in some way. And that's how I want to approach, I think, my performances and my approach towards characters in my films. Like the fact that they're trans or not is not, you know, might not be that material
Hmm.
in the sense of the story, and that people should just take it for what it is,
Yeah.
you know.
Being
Yeah,
part of a new normal, essentially. Like,
exactly.
yeah. Excellent.
Yeah.
And like coming back to lingua franca actually and the trans narrative in there, um, I just wanted to say like you make a very interesting point about cis trans relationships and how important, you know, trust is
Mhm.
in those relationships. Do you think there's anything different compared to cis relationships, or you know, when the trust is broken in lingua franca, do you think it's a two-way thing, you know, Alex hid the passport, Olivia hid her identity, or do trans characters have an obligation to like come out as such every single time?
I think, for a character like Olivia in her very specific situation, I think it's ultimately her prerogative because, um, for instance, not it's not like a matter of her own safety and well-being. It is a matter of her own safety and well-being whether she discloses the fact that she's transgender or not. And for example, Alex not knowing, whether she's trans or not, does not, pose a danger to his own, well-being or his safety as a person. But in Olivia's case, it is because she does not know how someone like Alex, who's, a man who's physically stronger and who happens to be a citizen, could retaliate against her, you know. And because, we don't live in a vacuum and, in the very specific milieu and setting in society that they're part of,
Yep.
Alex is invested with more power and more privilege than someone like Olivia. And it's a power that he could choose to use against her.
I think that's a really interesting turning point in the film, like, or like a transitory moment, if you like, when Alex finds out and he doesn't immediately react to that.
Yeah.
And there's this like ambiguity of whether he will, you know, retaliate, like whether he will react in a violent way.
Yeah.
You know, just like that production company, you know, may have liked it
Exactly.
as, but like I think it's super interesting because in the end you end up telling a story of, you know, having power over someone doesn't mean you have to exercise that power. And I think that was a
Exactly.
wonderful sort of nuanced way of ending it.
Yeah.
So
And also, oh, um, yeah, I also wanted to, because people expect stories like this to erupt in some kind of physical violence.
yeah.
It does get violence, but I wanted to focus more on the psychological and emotional violence, within that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said definitely about the fact that, you know, he takes the passport, but yeah, I mean, as you
But it,
say, I think it's,
yeah,
yeah, and I think it's a more subtle way of saying he had the power, he could have done something, but yeah,
yeah.
didn't.
And I also wanted to make a point not to villainize and demonize someone like Alex. You know, shortly after he does it and he sees the effect
Mm-hmm.
it has on her, he realizes that it's wrong, and that's why I feel, lingua franca is ultimately, I think, compassionate and humane because it doesn't portray people, for example, someone like Alex was like a cisgender, you know,
Yeah.
um, heterosexual, but
Privilege.
who's questioning his own, yeah, heterosexuality because of his burgeoning feelings towards Olivia, that sometimes, they're just flawed and confused, and they're sorting out and trying to sort out their own feelings, especially for someone like Alex, who's raised in a very misogynistic, chauvinistic um, environment. He's not necessarily given the resources to understand his emotions.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the sophistication to sort it out and to articulate them. So it manifests in, you know, the kind of passive aggressive things that he does, like gaslighting her
Mm-hmm.
in the film. And so it takes him pretty much the course of the film to understand how he really feels and to really maturely and responsibly express them. And that's what happens. I mean, that's also what Olivia is dealing with as well. Yeah.
So, you know, coming to that, like, there are themes of immigration running throughout the film. It feels like a very personal story, but also set in a very political context. And I'm wondering, what was your idea or intention with giving us this portrait of like three generations, essentially, I think, of immigrants. And like Olga, this older generation that is suffering from dementia, and history is repeating itself because the country is suffering from
Yeah.
dementia in a way, and you come back to it full circle with Olga peeling her orange at the very end, and we don't know if it's Olivia who's going to pick up the phone the next time.
Yeah.
you know?
I think from a macro perspective, kind of history, I think like a 60 to 80-year cycle of history. And that, the forces of change towards either democracy or authoritarianism and fascism, kind of these forces clash with each other over generations, like 2 or 3 generations. Like the Holocaust happened,
Yeah.
80 years ago. And yeah, I just wanted to portray kind of the cyclical nature
Mm-hmm.
of history. And like, right now it's Olivia's turn to become oppressed and persecuted. But 60 years ago, someone like Olga had also just come from a very politically turbulent and tumultuous,
Absolutely.
home country. And she came to the US um, to start a new life. And possibly in those early years, she was also subject to, prejudice and discrimination. And so a more cynical view of the film would be like, it's just different generations of immigrants kind of preying on the next one. I mean, yeah, I mean, in the US at one point it was the Italians that were discriminated against, and then the Irish, and then even Filipinos, from the 1930s to the 1950s. Right now it's the Mexicans' turn.
With the wall.
So yeah, for a country like America, it's like I guess the earlier generations of immigrants sometimes, are not above discriminating other immigrants as well.
Yeah, that's
Which is
that's
sad,
super
but
interesting, because it's like,
yeah,
it's interesting to think of it in that way, because it might have been that Alex's status as a third generation immigrant makes him empathize, with Olivia's
yeah,
situation. But it's also interesting from the point of view you just said. So coming back to your Netflix release of Lingua Franca, how did that all come about? Like, that's super exciting. Which countries is it going to be released in?
right now it's North America, so
Uh-huh.
primarily US and Canada. But Ava DuVernay's company reached out to us late last year about screening the film with them. But at that point, we had to decline politely because we haven't had our US premiere yet, which we had at AFI Fest.
Yeah.
But they had considered it for distribution, and then they reached out back to us in May
Mm-hmm.
and made an offer to distribute the film. And at that point, we accepted. It would be. I think it's very exciting to work with Ava's company and with Ava herself, and it would just be amazing for the film to reach you know a broader audience in North America as it will
Yeah.
now do on Netflix, especially given the current pandemic.
I mean, do you see a potential date for an actual theatrical like screening in the States, a release even, or?
I think for now we're doing the Netflix premiere on August 26th
Beautiful.
because I think, yeah, contractually, I don't think we're allowed to do that theatrical after that.
Mm.
But, you know, to be honest, in the US, I'm not even sure when the pandemic will, you know, become manageable and subside. So,
This is a really strange Q&A, but
yeah.
like, yes, absolutely. Anyway, so what about the Philippines? I think that's a super interesting topic to touch on. Like, what has it been played in the Philippines? Have your previous films been released?
Yeah.
And what's the reaction, let's say, to the sort of topic? Is it a taboo there? Is it not? Is it like an open discussion regarding trans rights in the Philippines?
Yeah. The Philippines is strange. It's a Catholic country.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 96% Roman Catholic. We used to be a colony of Spain for 300 years. So I think the culture of machismo has really carried over. And there are trans characters in film TV. And in fact, the one of the most popular Philippine entertainers there now is a TV host and actor who's like a queer cross-dresser. But the kind of portrayal of trans characters almost reduces them to, you know, stereotypes and caricatures. That kind of the flamboyant,
Mm-hmm.
Loud and funny.
Obviously. Yeah.
And so that's the kind of, image
Yeah.
of trans people that's very popular, so outlandish comedy. So for a film like Lingua Franca, the response is muted, which I'm not surprised with because it really questions those caricatures and stereotypes. And, when I made Lingua Franca, I resolutely and, pointedly wrote a character that was completely different from all those things, that was fleshed out. She's not a perfect saintly character, but I think she's layered and psychologically interesting.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing her with us. Thank you so much for letting us in on like all these other layers and interesting
Thank you.
points.
Thanks for saying that.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Isabel. I think this is a good point to wrap it up. And we can't wait to hear, news on your upcoming projects. Really excited for you, genuinely.
Thank you, Diego. And thank you, everyone. Thank you to Queer Wave for having Lingua Franca be part of your inaugural festival. And I hope there will be many more.
Thank you so much. And hopefully
Right.
physical ones as well.
Yes. And I'll come if I have a movie.
Oh, yes. And let's not talk about a pandemic in the next Q&A, please.
Yes. All right.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.